Hi Year 11 and welcome to this short video on the Emigree by Carol Rumens. So we're just going to cover in about hopefully 5 minutes some of the key things you might need to remember about this beautiful poem. So keep watching to learn a little bit more. So in a nutshell, this poem is one of our first person dramatic monologues. There once was a country, I left it as a child. Just because it is in first person, it doesn't mean that it is about the poet who's written it. So please remember that we talk about a persona or a character or a voice. And this poem focuses on the experience of a emigree, so somebody who is obviously leaving their country because of warfare, or well, in this case very much so because of warfare, which brings with it feelings about powerlessness, feelings about conflict. So think about some of those major themes that come up when we study this poetry cluster. So in this poem, as I've already alluded to, the speaker is in some sort of exile from her childhood city, and we're told that tyrants now run the country. It's sick with tyrants. For me, it always makes me think of The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini, which is a beautiful, beautiful but very, very sad book. And it's got those similar kind of themes about having to leave a country because you are no longer safe there once a particular group of people have taken over. In The Kite Runner, it's the Taliban. In this poem, it's not specifically mentioned, and that gives it a universality, which we see in other poems where the kind of poet doesn't want to place it specifically within one kind of war or one country. The poem is filled with juxtapositions between light and dark imagery. Some of these are very explicit, so there's a constant reference to sunlight at the end of every stanza, which I'll talk about a lot in this video. Others are more implied, so in the sense of, like, as we've said, like the tyrants, the sickness. It's not explicitly telling us it's dark. We do get a reference to, and they accuse me of being dark in their city, in their free city, but it's more implicit about that kind of juxtaposition between light and dark, maybe like good and evil, freedom and restriction, that run throughout this poem. And it also helps to create a sense of ambiguity. There are so many nuances to this poem that you can talk about, and I'll do that a little bit later. The speaker's memories are vividly associated with sunlight and colour, as we've said, and I think there's that real sense of kind of like positivity, optimism, maybe even like a desperation for optimism. We can start to look at that she desperately tries to remain positive even when she hears negative things about her city. And the speaker's mother tongue has been banned, but it remains unforgotten. And again, even with that, there's ideas about when or where is it that she's feeling like her mother tongue is no longer her own? Is it in the country that she's left, or is it now that she's moved to a new country which perhaps doesn't value her or her culture in the same way? And finally, particularly in the third stanza, there's a real focus on the personification of my city, which emphasises the really strong ongoing emotional connection that the speaker in the poem has to her homeland. It creates this real sense of intimacy through the personification, as if the country has gone to her like an old friend or a loved one. And it's something that's really beautiful, but again, actually there's quite a lot of sadness kind of surrounding it. So just like in Poppies, this is a poem where there's some really, really key symbols, and there are far many more than I have kind of put on this slide, but these are just four that jump out to me. So first of all, as I've already mentioned, the sunlight that is repeated at the end of every single stanza. We've only got three, but it's there at the end of each stanza. It creates a relentless positivity and sense of optimism, because we obviously associate the sunlight with everything that's kind of like good and joyful. And it maybe suggests that despite all of her struggles, and despite maybe the ongoing struggles that are left in this country, there is still this sense of hope for its future. The bright filled paperweight is such a fantastic metaphor. If we think of what a paperweight is, it's a kind of durable casing which is holding something normally very fragile and precious within it. So I like to unpack this and talk about, it's almost like her kind of like, you know, her brain is the outside of the paperweight, and the memory of her city lodged inside it is that kind of like fragile thing that needs to be protected. Obviously it's interesting because we can talk about ideas about kind of her memory being something fragile and precious. She doesn't want that to be destroyed. Obviously memory is also prone to, I don't know how to phrase it, prone to kind of weakness. We can forget things, we can kind of twist things and how we remember it. So there's a kind of sense as well that is she remembering things correctly? Is this bright filled paperweight, is this actually only in her imagination, her memory now, this kind of utopia, this ideal world that she remembers, or ideal city? We've then got Time Rolls Its Tanks, which is a really beautiful example of military personification. When I say beautiful, I don't mean obviously in the image that's being presented, because it's something that is very, very stark and obviously subtly violent. Time rolls its tanks. It's this kind of like onslaught, this attack on both kind of physically maybe the country, but also again on her memory. We've already talked about memory and how unreliable, that's the word I was looking for, how unreliable it could be. But now we've also got that idea about that memory can suffer through time as well. Our memories fade, etc., and again become more unreliable. And Time Rolls Its Tanks is just one example of a semantic field of warfare which occurs throughout the poem, creating this quite, as we've already said, dark juxtaposition to the sunlight that she's trying desperately to hang on to. And then finally, the first line of the third stanza is, I have no passport, there's no way back at all. And if we think of what a passport symbolises, a sense of freedom, freedom of movement, freedom to travel, it's maybe we could look at it in a sense of legal identity. Without a passport, she is restricted, she's trapped, she's cut off from her country. But also we can argue that she is trapped somewhere else, somewhere that isn't her original like home, and maybe somewhere that isn't necessarily the nicest place for her, again depending on how we interpret particularly the final stanza. But that, again, that negativity, that maybe sense of kind of like restriction, is juxtaposed with the personification of her city coming back to her. There's this sense of resilience, that she can never be kind of broken down while she has her memories and this kind of positivity. So in terms of form and structure, this is another one of our dramatic monologues, just like with, for example, My Last Duchess or Poppies, there's a real sense of kind of personal address throughout this poem, even though we don't actually have any direct address used. I think for me it's the use of the past tense, so there once was a country, I left it as a child, which is interspersed with then present tense, as if she's telling us there and then, and that creates quite a confessional, intimate tone, as if this story is being shared directly with us, this quite personal story about identity and memory and struggle, and that for me that heightens the sense of loss of identity and her kind of sadness, even as the speaker is hanging on to her positive memories. It creates this really personal tone as you read the poem. The poem itself is 3 stanzas. We get that enjambment and caesura, which obviously if you were given this poem in the exam, you'd want to maybe pick up on some of those very specific moments of enjambment and caesura to talk about. In itself, it creates quite a sense of chaos because there's no set structure with the enjambment and caesura, but then that's juxtaposed with a sense of order that's found throughout the 3 stanzas, if I can get my words out, which obviously, like, the enjambment and chaos could reflect the enjambment and caesura could reflect the sense of chaos that she feels at having been displaced and kind of ripped away from her home, but yet she's trying to find order in her memories and in this maybe kind of like could be seen as a new start, obviously a new beginning, and the 3 stanzas with their regular line lengths of 8, 8, 9 could maybe help to reflect that as well. And every stanza ends in that imagery of sunlight, which you'll be so bored of hearing me say now because I've said it on I think every slide. And that could be seen to leave us with a feeling of hope if you want to be optimistic. We won't talk about the last stanza, which is a little bit more ambiguous. My shadow falls as evidence of sunlight. That's really personal. Do you read that as a sign of hope? Do you read that as a sign of like defeat? Which one wins for you? Is it the shadow or is it the sunlight? Asking all the big questions on this PowerPoint slide. So key terms and comparison poems. We've got some enjambments, so when a sentence in poetry runs over from one line to the next with no punctuation. We've talked about this in other slides, so we've got that in quite a few poems. Free verse as well, open form of poetry, does not use a set or regular metre or rhyme, tends to follow the rhythm of natural or irregular speech. Again, we've had that in other poems like Poppies, so it really helps to create that sense of just a normal kind of speech and conversation. So which poems could we compare this one to? I think people tend to feel less confident with Emigree because they think it's got less obvious comparisons. For me, this poem is all about identity, a sense of self, sense of belonging, sense of powerlessness or finding power through your identity. So checking out my history is a really, really obvious one for me, with themes of identity and power and taking back that power. London as well, though, a kind of abuse of power and misrule. So we know in London it's all about the rich misusing their power over the poor, whereas in the Emigree, it's a group of tyrants, kind of unspecified specifically, but we can see that universality to any group, for example, like the Taliban in the world that we live in today, obviously, with what they're doing. And then we could also compare it to Poppies. It's 2 female speakers, which maybe don't get a lot of in this cluster, but also we've got the effects of conflict on people. Same sort of ways you can maybe link to like Kamikaze, like Power of Society, but there are definitely some really specific comparisons we can make with Emigree and other poems in the anthology. And then finally, as usual, we've got the lovely knowledge snapshot by the wonderful Stuart Pryke. So please do feel free to pause it here and take some notes or screenshot and kind of make it into your own mind map or whatever you want to do for revision. Hopefully this session has been helpful. I gave you a promise at the start that it would be about 5 minutes and I totally lied, so I'm so sorry. But hopefully there has been something that's helped you understand the Emigree a little bit better. If it has been helpful, please do remember to like and subscribe to our Cedars YouTube channel. Go well, Year 11, and we're almost there with revision now.